Podcasting is more than just talking. It's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
It's BS with Bob Schmidt in the podcast featuring Dr. Tommy Watson this week. Dr. Inspiration, he's America's leading expert on turning transitions into success, from homeless to living out of a trunk to doctor and successful entrepreneur. Dr. Tommy Watson and I have had conversation over the last probably 3-4 years, just talking about different things on my radio show. And now that we're doing podcasts, I want to focus a little bit more, Tommy, this time around on entrepreneurship, because I know we've talked about education in the past. We've talked a little bit about, you're growing up on the rough side or the wrong side of the tracks in Denver.
Yes.
How did you take that, basically dealt a crap hand, and turn that into becoming a doctor and then to become a successful entrepreneur?
Bob, thanks again for having me. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, and I love the work you're doing. You know what? It was probably about 8 years ago. I was on a flight headed to Charlotte, North Carolina. I was a school principal at the time, and I was reading the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And in the book, there was a section there called 10,000 Hours. And it talked about that our purposes in life will be connected to things that we've been doing for at least 10,000 hours, which equates to about 10 years of experience. So I began to wonder on this 3-hour plane ride, what is it that I've been doing for at least 10 years I knew probably better than anything else? And it took me back to my experiences of growing up homeless in foster homes and crisis centers and constantly dealing with change. And I said I wanted to create a business model where I was teaching people to overcome obstacles and deal with change. And it hit me right there at that point in time that that's what I was going to do. And I went back to Minnesota at the time, and 6 months later, I was leaving my job as a school principal in pursuit of entrepreneurship. So, it's funny when we think about the things we have kind of had interactions with in life, and, they can be small and in many situations. We don't necessarily see those things as possible opportunities to open up doors for us to have entrepreneurship endeavors later on. But that was certainly the case with just taking my story and some of the challenges and trials that I faced and turning it into an opportunity to now help individuals and businesses deal with overcoming obstacles and dealing with change. It's been a very rewarding.
Well, before we talk about the help piece, let me say this, that people hate change. We all have it in our lives, but it's one of those things that causes anticipation. I mean, people hate when they think about dying, that's up there. When they think about talking in front of other people, that's up there. And change falls in the top, the top 3, top 4 of things that people hate.
And it's not popular because it has a lot to do with the fear of unknown. It's also a matter of leaving your comfort zone sometimes, because when you start talking about change pushes you to do something different. But I think it's important for people to know, even when we're dealing with fear and uncertainty, what have you, that change really serves a purpose, and the purpose is to really make us different and to alter us and modify us. Now, the essence of change in terms of the outcome, whether it's positive or negative, it depends solely upon our perspective in life. So if we go into dealing with change, which is inevitable, and look at it from a negative standpoint, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the end result is going to definitely be negative versus if we channel that energy into looking at it in terms of something positive, the outcome will eventually become something that's positive.
So a guy going from homeless to being a high school principal to deciding to leave that job to help other people deal with change, what was your steps that you took in order to leave a good paying job, leave a job that you were good at, leave a job that people looked up to you and respected you, to start doing things on your own?
Yeah, and that's a great question as well. One of the first things that I had to do was really get my mind ready for the change. And there was a book that someone referred me to called As a Man Thinketh, which comes from biblical scripture that talks about that no matter what it is, the outcomes in your life are going to depend solely upon the way you think the outcomes are going to come out. So I began reading this book called As a Man Thinketh, and really just began to get my mindset to a place where I was telling myself that when I left that job at the end of the year, that whatever I thought was going to happen was going to happen. So I began to follow the top 10 speakers who were successful in the industry, sign up for their newsletters, and begin to receive their strategies in terms of what they were doing to be successful. I also spent a little time talking to people who weren't successful. But one of the things I found right away was that for many of those folks who were not successful, their stories went like this. They said, Tommy, you know what? I jumped out there after leaving my job, whether it be fired or what have you, to become an entrepreneur. And this went wrong and that went wrong. And shortly after, I went back to my job. When I talked to those entrepreneurs who were successful, they jumped out there and they said, you know, this went wrong, that went wrong, this went wrong again, that went wrong, this went wrong, that went wrong, and then eventually it worked out. So I knew going into this that I had to be looking at it from a long-term perspective, and that the other thing that scraped my mind was that there was no plan B. Once I went into this thing, this thing was going to work no matter what. And I had to be into it for the long haul, and I could not turn back to what I had left no matter what. And that's why I found a lot of those folks who had jumped out there and tried to become entrepreneurs and really weren't really all the way into it. The moment things got tough, they turned around and went back to being an employee, which is fine in some instances. But had they stuck with it a little bit longer, the end result would have probably been quite different.
It's kind of funny to think about what you just said, because you're saying that the people that failed and then took failure as the only option, they failed as the business owner or as an entrepreneur. But those that failed and learned from the failures, those are the ones that have been successful. So you're kind of saying that failure isn't an option, but it is an option.
Absolutely. And you want to fail because failure is learning. So it was a matter of perspective in terms of how they looked at failure, because many of those individuals who went back to being an employer, by the way, they looked at failure as kind of an end result, whereas the folks who were successful looked at failure as a process, a stepping stone to the next thing. What did I learn from this? How can I get better at this? How can I create other alternatives? Those are some of the things they looked at versus saying, oh, this didn't work. I'm not good at it. I failed. Because all those moments are learning opportunities.
Dr. Tommy Watson, my guest on the BS with Bob Schmidt podcast. So how do you go about helping somebody that's dealing with some of these trials and tribulations there, Tommy?
Well, the first thing you got to look at when it comes to change is you got to begin with the mindset and let people know that no matter where you are in life, change is inevitable. My grandmother used to say all the time that the one thing that's always consistent is change and more change. So change is always taking place. So we have to prepare ourselves to be able to adjust and monitor change as it comes. Sometimes change comes up on us unexpectedly. I had a position where I was working a job out of college, and I got fired from it. One day I came in, and they said I was fired. I didn't have leadership skills, and I found myself going into this whirlwind of, now what do I do to take care of my family? It was very uncomfortable, but I also knew that going backwards and hitting rock bottom was not going to be okay with me. So I remember just scrambling, placing my resumes and connecting with people and trying to do everything I could to keep moving forward. Because one of the things that happens is when change takes place, if you become stagnant, you don't remain stagnant. So if you stop doing, you find yourself in a decline. So one of the best things you can do is take a moment to breathe, but then start taking steps and taking small actions to keep yourself moving forward. Because again, when you become stagnant, you find yourself going into places of anger, depression, denial, which really, causes a deep decline, which is the direction you don't want to be going when it comes to change.
Oh, it definitely throws you into a downward spiral, that's for sure. You mentioned rock bottom. Do you think that you need to hit rock bottom in order to propel yourself into success?
Well, I think in some situations it definitely helps others. When I was in that moment and I didn't have anything else to depend on, it forced me to, kind of come up with some creative ideas. And I actually found myself going to work at a place, Bob, that I never thought I would have been working at, especially with a college degree. I went to work at McDonald's. It became one of the most important jobs I ever had, a job that taught me about entrepreneurship. But in some other situations, I believe we can create our own rock bottom. We can create a perceived rock bottom, just the idea of thinking about how bad things may get if I don't go out here and take action to find these other speakers or other individuals who are doing what it is I want to be doing. Knowing what the potential consequence could be could also be something that could propel a person moving forward, and you don't necessarily have to hit rock bottom. But either situation both works. But I would say the advantage probably goes to the person who can create the perceived rock bottom situation in their lives and don't necessarily hit rock bottom, but use that as motivation take steps to move forward.
I really believe that the motivation piece there is huge, because I don't know about other people, but for myself, my motivation is to continue to do better, to try to be the best podcaster that I can be, to be the best interviewer that I can be. And even though I don't have a radio job at the moment, and I probably won't ever have a radio job again, because I like doing this, and like we were talking about earlier about working on your own and working for yourself, and to be that entrepreneur, I wonder if other people have that same thought process.
Absolutely. And for those folks who do have that same thought process, one of the best things you can do is start finding out the people who are in your industry who are doing it very, very well. And remember that success leaves footprints. So for those individuals who are doing it well at a high level, begin to mimic some of their behaviors. One of the fastest ways to become a champion is to take the behaviors of a champion and begin to apply them to your own life. So begin to mimic those same behaviors you're seeing from those folks who are getting done correctly, can really decrease your learning curve as you begin to endure and go through change. It's also helpful to be able to hear that their stories will include many moments of change. So the changes, the failures, the setbacks that you're dealing with are part of the process, and it does not have to become moments for you to quit or become overly frustrated.
All right, Tommy, I'm going to go and pull back from my conversations that I've had with you in the past. I know that you went to University of Minnesota on a football scholarship, so I want to ask you about being a football player at such a high level like that. Were you using your advice that you just gave there about pulling from some of the people that you, quote, looked up to as a player to help to propel your career?
Absolutely. When I was in high school, the player that I used to follow day in and day out was Barry Sanders. Because I was in high school, Barry Sanders was at the University of Oklahoma State. And I would mimic his routines. I tried to run the ball very similar to the way Barry Sanders ran. Even though I was a big guy, I didn't take a lot of hits because I watched Barry Sanders do the same thing. My training methods were very similar. I tried to eat in a similar fashion. So Barry Sanders became the guy that I kind of modeled my own football career and pathway after. And it landed me a chance to go to the University of Minnesota, and was very beneficial to me.
Dr. Tommy Watson, my guest on the BS with Bob Schmidt podcast. So is it different between a child and an adult going through some of these changes or some of these processes?
Yeah, it really is, because as a kid, when you're going through changes, oftentimes you have systems in place, you have people in place that you could probably find yourself leaning on in many circumstances. As an adult, and in particular as a person who may be leading the change, oftentimes you may find yourself in a situation where you are the only one who may be the breadwinner. You may be the only person who is providing direction and guidance to a family. So a lot of it falls on your shoulders. So again, and then there's an expectation from those around you that you have to figure it out, and that we're not going to endure change for a long time. So again, it becomes very, very essential that the learning curve is quickly reduced when you're an adult versus a kid. I think society gives you leeway to kind of learn and bounce back from mistakes when you're a kid, but there's an expectation when you become an adult that we have to kind of learn and bounce back from those things a lot quicker than when we were kids.
Was that hard for you to notice or to deal with when you were a principal?
It was. It really was, because I didn't, at the time I was a principal, I didn't really have a lot of entrepreneurial friends out there. So when I jumped into the world of becoming an entrepreneur, it was a matter of really scrambling to try to find and make connections with those individuals who are in the speaking, coaching, and consulting industry, and really kind of learning their stories and gravitating their messages and pulling from their principles really quickly, which took a lot of time, because a lot of it, was encompassed of trying to find these individuals. Now I'm doing another piece of the journey. I'm actually working on a movie about my story. So a lot of that has been telling, going into the film industry, again, an industry where I don't know anyone, but I'm trying to be smarter. So what I'm doing now is using more of my social media connections to build those relationships and increase my knowledge there. So, every journey that we step into that may be different or causes more change is very, very important for us to begin to look around and see who we may know, who may already be in the industry, or who can connect us better in the industry, and begin to do our own individual research to kind of help, again, speed up that learning curve.
Who plays Dr. Tommy Watson in the Watson
Wow,
movie?
you know what? I would love Denzel to play me, but he's a little bit aged right there. I don't know if he can put on a football uniform and run through a hole.
We've talked a little bit about football, and as a kid growing up and then getting your scholarship to the University of Minnesota, I'm assuming that you probably wanted to be in the NFL, as do most other young kids that have that type of dream. Obviously, that didn't happen. You're an entrepreneur now. How did that happen?
No, it was devastating. When I experienced my back injury my junior year, I just came off of a spring season where I was the MVP of the football team. Things were looking very promising in terms of my athletic career. I was in the best shape ever was in college, and suddenly had a back injury that ended my career just like that. And I remember going through all the phases of emotions. I mean, I was in denial, thinking to myself, this can't be the end of it. And I became angry. And then, definitely chaos kind of settled in my mind. And then there was some moments of depression. So I'm saying, okay, now what am I going to do? This is the only thing I knew for many, many years. And this was the only goal I had, was to get to the NFL. And it began to, once I got to a place where I said, you know what, I can't change this, I began to open up my eyes to other avenues. And there was this readiness to kind of begin to take place to say, okay, all right, well, what's next? What else can I do? What else do I love doing? And I came to the conclusion I love helping people. So once I began to get to that place, I began to have this reemergence where I was excited to move forward, just as though I was excited for those same football games. I now wanted to go into those schools. I got the butterflies when I got to the door of the school, when I was getting ready to go in there and talk to some kids about preparing for their futures. I had that same excitement and thrill that I had when I was getting ready to go into Michigan and Penn State to pounce on guys on the football field. So I've been very fortunate to find, an industry that gives me that same level of excitement, but it took some time to get there, though. I had to really allow myself to go through the various emotional phases, and at the end, realizing that, hey, I can't change what's been done. What I can change is how I move forward.
Being dealt that huge of a disappointment and a blow, that had to suck. I got to ask this, though. So with that happening to you, did you ever want to fall back to the way that you were raised? Go live on the streets, go experience drugs, go get high, you know what I mean? Did you want to go back to what you grew up with?
Never an option.
No?
Never an option for me. That was never. Once I decided in third grade that I was not going to join the gang and got involved in sports, that lifestyle was never, ever, ever going to be an option for me. Even though I lived in poverty, I always told myself this was not going to be the place that I was going to land and be forever. So that was never an option for me. My options were only going forward. That lifestyle was too devastating. I got a chance to witness the damage and destruction that lifestyle did to my parents and my siblings. So never, ever contemplated for once going to that lifestyle at all.
Good for you. Can anybody do it, Tommy? Can anybody be successful?
Absolutely. I believe any and everyone can do it, but not many people do it because of the situation that we talked about earlier, where many people face adversity. The tendency is to quit versus looking at adversity as an opportunity to learn something, to say, okay, how can I go at it again tomorrow? And it's okay sometimes that, when you're out there bumping your head, to say, all right, I need to take a break and come back at this thing again tomorrow. But you want to come back at it, though. But a lot of people simply quit. They pick up their ball and they go home. They don't continue to ask questions in terms of finding out alternative ways to get around this obstacle or go over it or go under it. They simply quit and take the ball and go home. So for those individuals who stay in the park and continue to kind of fight it out and seek other opportunities to become better in the industry that they're in, take advice to find mentors and what have you, they tend to do a lot better.
Is there ever a time, though, that when you say, okay, enough's enough, I've done it the same way every single day for 35 years, I'm done. I'm gonna try something. I gotta give up. I can't do this every single day.
Actually, I think, and that's part of the change process. I think we should each and every day we should be asking ourselves, how can we get better? And sometimes asking ourselves, how can we get better, shines a light that we're growing, we're developing, and the place we may have been 20 years ago may not necessarily be the place that is meant for us to be at this particular time. Maybe the place we were 20 years ago was simply preparation for you to be at a new place today. So as we take those skill sets and recognize that those experiences, those relationships, all those things we gained over the last 20 years have been very, very valuable to us, and now they can be transferred over to this new industry, we begin to look at it quite differently. There's a great Chinese proverb that says, when the winds of change blow, some people build walls, others build windmills. So again, the winds of change are going to come. So we can either embrace them, or we can kind of stay still and become stagnant. But we can begin to, open our wings up and begin to ask the questions in terms of how can I get better every day. It opens up our eyes to new possibilities.
Tommy, how can an entrepreneur get over that, though? Because I think a lot of times that, it's like, hey, I want to do it this way, and it's not really working my way. And, okay, there's winds of change, obviously, but I really want to just do it.
Absolutely.
I just really want to do it this way.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to, I'm a big fan that people need to have hope in order to accomplish goals and dreams. And when it comes to hope, there's two aspects that are absolutely critical when it comes to having hope. So the first one is you have to have willpower. So there has to be an internal drive, an internal want to do something. But that drive and internal will can only go so far. The next piece you have to have what they call way power. So you have to have role models, mentors, a blueprint to get to where it is you're trying to get to. I think that's where a lot of people fall short. So investing the time to find mentors, getting books, researching your industry, researching the pathway to success, taking those stories that have been done before you and learning the ins and outs of those stories can be very, very helpful when you're on your pathway and journey to try and experience the same thing. Because oftentimes we go down that pathway, we often feel like we're alone. And what we've experienced is an isolated situation, but we find that for many entrepreneurs, the pathway has been very similar to many of them. There have been many failures and setbacks, and the pathway is to keep going, keep bouncing back from those setbacks.
You mentioned blueprint, and a lot of successful people have their goals, and they write down their goals on a daily basis. And it's kind of funny. My oldest son just moved from a group of buddies to live on his own, and at the same time, I was cleaning up my garage, and I had a whiteboard, and he said, "Dad, can I have that?" And my wife and I went to his apartment the other day, and on his wall, he had written down on the whiteboard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then he wrote down things that he has to do. Then he wrote down, did I read? Did I write down my goals? Did I look at my goals?
Wow.
Did I? And I looked at that, and I kind of had a smile on my
Wow.
face. I'm like, dude, that's fantastic. You're 23 years old, and
Yes.
you're knocking it out of the park.
Yes, absolutely. Because what we see, we become. So he's learning the habits of create that visual before him all the time, and he's setting those goals and making sure he has a checklist of going after those things daily. That's the way you accomplish those goals and dreams.
Yeah,
Good for him.
But I mean, to see that in a young man, to me that just that says a lot about the young man that I believe he's going to become.
Absolutely, and kudos for you and your wife for instilling that in him.
I'm pretty sure he got that from somebody else.
Or your wife, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely there. So, as a speaker, as a coach, as a consultant, a lot of people in your profession and what you're doing have written a book. I got to ask
Yes.
about your book.
The Resilience of Champions was a book that one talks a lot about my journey through McDonald's Corporation and how I went there to McDonald's after experiencing losing my job and having very low expectations in terms of what McDonald's could provide for me, but it ended up being one of the best experiences I ever participated in. So I took the learning habits that I adopted from McDonald's Corporation, incorporated them into this book, The Resilience of Champions, and began to tell the stories of myself and other entrepreneurs like Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates, and a number of other entrepreneurs in terms of setting the stage for how they became change agents and champions of resiliency by enduring the change process as they went through life and overcoming obstacles.
Was it hard to write the book?
It was. And at the time I was writing the book, I remember I was going through a divorce. I just moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. My family was struggling. And there was a lot of stuff that I was just dealing with on the outside, but this book kept me going because I was talking about resilience and how, resilient people bounce back from challenges and changes. And this was coming out of me at one of the most critical point in time. One of the things I talk about in the book was that resilient people in tough times, they will find a way to shine the spotlight on what's going right. So sometimes, when things are going becoming challenging in our lives, we have a tendency to focus on everything that's going negative. But resilient people will hone in on the one thing that may be going well and ride that thing out. And I remember going through this day after day after day, really struggling with it and finding the one thing that I enjoyed doing, which was writing and trying to inspire people, and just kind of holding on to that thought until it got me through this very, very challenging time that I was going through at the time. So this book was birthed out of pain and challenge.
You talk about inspiration, Tommy. Who inspires you?
Right now, my kids, my family, my new wife inspires me. We're working together as entrepreneurs. My kids, just seeing them going after their goals and dreams every day, knowing that I have to be better. And I have a 12-year-old son who's almost tall as me, so I know I have to stay on the grind every day to get bigger. He's going to be trying to out-top me soon.
I'm pretty I'm 6'2", and my every one of my children is shorter than I am by about
really?
much. Yeah, so so I know exactly what you're saying. As they're getting older, I'm like, and then they just plateau, and I'm like, all right.
Voice is getting deeper there and everything. So I got to really stay in this gym and everything. Yeah.
I always like to ask my podcast guests about a talent. So, what's your most useless talent?
Useless talent. Wow. That's a great question. I am a horrible golfer. And even saying that I'm a golfer is a stretch. It's horrible. It's horrible. I mean, you would never probably want to go out there with me because you're probably sitting laughing at my game all day, every day. So that's a useless talent that I have at this particular time that I need some help on. So if you have any skill sets or direction in that area, definitely let me know. I need some help in that area.
You know what? Actually, if we ever get a chance to meet, you and I should go golfing, because it would be the world's longest golf match, because I, too, am a horrible golfer.
So we may be out there all week long then, huh?
Well, they
learning a bunch of bad habits.
I'll tell you what, that would be horrible. So, being a speaker and being an entrepreneur, and being a guy that presents in front of a lot of things, what makes you nervous?
What makes me nervous? What makes me nervous? What? I don't get nervous oftentimes. It's more so excitement. The times I've gotten nervous is when I've had to deliver new content. So the content I've been delivering for the last several years has been around self-motivation, and then resiliency has been a new one for me. I'm also doing some things around teamwork. So typically when I'm doing something new, it kind of creates a little bit of anxiety in me in terms of how is this going to be received from the folks I'm coaching or speaking to, or the folks that I'm mentoring. How's it going to be received? So that's always a little agonizing in the beginning there.
You'd mentioned self-motivation. How can we, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as marketers, as listeners of this podcast, how can we self-motivate ourselves to get that first goal done, or to get the last goal on the sheet done?
Absolutely. I think there's three things you can do. The first thing is you got to stay true to who you are. Stay true to your goals. Stay true to your values. Identify those things that are important to you, who's important to you in your life. The second thing is to have a vision for what it is you want to accomplish. I'm a big fan of vision boards. Me and my family, we do vision boards every year. I encourage others that I come across to do vision boards. I was working with a group of students here last week in Omaha, Nebraska, who were struggling, living in poverty. And I do this every year in Omaha, Nebraska, and it's great to see when these kids do vision boards, how their eyes open up, the level of excitement, the energy they get. All these kids talk about going to college and all these other great things in the midst of currently living in poverty. So vision boards are very, very powerful, and gives you a chance to see beyond your current circumstances. And then lastly, you got to be able to create a cheerleader inside of you. So you got to create a voice and some verbal affirmations around you that, just kind of cheer you on to go on to your goals. And those are the three aspects of self-motivation right there that all of us need. So if you do those three things, your chances of accomplishing your goals and dreams increased tremendously.
So what words do you tell yourself before you do anything?
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's one of my biggest ones.
Dr. Tommy Watson, thanks for being a part of the BS with Bob podcast. How do people reach out and find you and find your book and find out more information on how we can be inspired and how we can be resilient and how we can, work toward becoming a better person?
It's always a pleasure being on with you, Bob. They go to my website at www.tawatson.com. I have two books out. One is called The Resilience of Champions. The other one is called A Face of Courage, which details my life growing up in Denver in poverty and out of foster homes and crisis centers and motel rooms to being homeless, what have you, and then going on, like we talked about before, to play football for the University of Minnesota. And then be on the lookout for a new movie that I'm working on called Resilient. It's in the very early stages, but I would love to bring that into the lives of a lot of folks here in the future and bring them hope and inspiration.
The BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer. Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com.
This has been another podcastforhire.com production.